A lot of times we think of the people in the Bible as heroes, but when you read carefully, you see that God uses people who aren't quite perfect. He uses weirdos, quitters, and heroes. John the Baptist was weird. Did you ever notice that? I had, but I never let myself really admit it until one day as I was having my devotional with God. Think about it. Where did John the Baptist live? The desert. Well, maybe that's not totally weird, but it is a little different. He chose to live there. What did he wear? Now that's where it starts to get weird. He wore a camel's hair robe and a loincloth of leather. And what did he eat? Honey and locusts. The guy ate bugs with honey. Very weird. Okay, there is some disagreement as to whether the locusts were bugs or a kind of plant, but his diet was still weird compared to others of his day. But God used him. Think about it. The man who baptized Jesus, the Son of God, probably ate bugs. And what's even more amazing is this weird guy was so successful that he had all the Jews coming out to listen to him, and many of them wanted him to baptize them. Matthew 3:5-6 says, "Then Jerusalem and all Judea and all the region about the Jordan were going out to him, and they were baptized by him in the river Jordan, confessing their sins." Yeah, God uses weird people. What about the Apostle Paul, who wrote so much of the New Testament? Well, before he was Paul, he was Saul of Tarsus, and Saul was a murderer with no mercy. Oh, he might have only brought many of the Christians into prison. He might not have killed them personally. We're not told exactly, but he was responsible for their deaths. He searched them out and found them and dragged them into prison to be killed, and he knew it. In Acts, we are told that he consented to the death of Stephen. He was the most unlikely candidate for an apostle imaginable. But Jesus looked at him and said, "That's my man." And then there was Simon, son of Jonah, otherwise known as Peter. Peter was an overconfident, uneducated fisherman. And Jesus chose him to lead the people of the new covenant. What about the women? Well, Mary Magdalene was what we might call a loose woman who had 7 demons cast out of her. But after his resurrection, she was the first person that Jesus revealed himself to. His mother? She was a teenage girl. God chose a teenage girl to be the mother of the Son of God. And he chose an old woman to be a mother of his son's herald. If a human had made the same kinds of choices that God had made, we'd wondered if he were insane. But you see, God doesn't think like a man. In 1 Corinthians 3:18-20 it says, "Let no one deceive himself. If anyone among you thinks that he is wise in this age, let him become a fool, that he may become wise. For the wisdom of this world is folly with God. For it is written, He catches the wise in their craftiness. And again, the Lord knows the thoughts of the wise, that they are futile. You see, God has a wisdom that we don't have. When we try to use human wisdom to fulfill God's plans, it doesn't work. But if we listen to God, no matter how crazy it seems, we can have success. God sees potential even when no one else can. There was someone else in the Bible that seemed like he was a failure, a real screw-up. This young guy jumped headfirst into situations that he couldn't handle, and he failed the people who depended on him. We see him first as a young man, or maybe what we would call a boy today even, in Mark 14, verses 51 to 52, in the Garden of Gethsemane on the night of Jesus' arrest. It says, "And a young man followed him with nothing but a linen cloth about his body. And they seized him, but he left the linen cloth and ran away naked." Well, I guess we should give him points for escaping. But running down the streets of Jerusalem scared and naked in the middle of the night doesn't sound like a good recommendation for someone that we should depend on. And most commentators agree that this young man's name was John Mark, and this wouldn't be his last screw-up. I mean, even Paul thought that John Mark was a failure. Acts 15:37-40 tells us, "Now Barnabas wanted to take with them John called Mark, but Paul thought best not to take with them one who had withdrawn from them in Pamphylia and had not gone with them to the work. And there arose a sharp disagreement, so that they separated from each other. Barnabas took Mark with him and sailed away to Cyprus, but Paul chose Silas and departed, having been commended by the brothers to the grace of the Lord." Mark was a quitter. Not only had he left Paul and Barnabas when they needed him, but now he was the cause of the breakup of the dream team who had worked so well together to make the first Gentile churches in the world. The first Gentile church in the world was located in Antioch, and together they had made it a success. And then Paul and Barnabas had been specifically chosen by the Holy Spirit to make the first missionary journey to the Gentiles in other places. Paul was not willing to give Mark another chance to disappoint him. And if the story had stopped there, Mark might have gone down in history as a nothing, a failure. But God and Barnabas saw potential in Mark. And the Holy Spirit developed that potential until we find out in 1 Peter 5:13 that Peter thought of Mark as a son. And Paul? Well, Paul would change his mind later too. In 3 different letters, Paul would mention Mark in glowing terms. In fact, in his second letter to Timothy, Paul says that Mark is useful to him. 2 Timothy 4:11 says, "Luke alone is with me. Get Mark and bring him with you, for he is very useful for me, for ministry." How did a weirdo like John the Baptist win over most of the Jews? How did Saul of Tarsus, the ardent Pharisee and hater of Christians, become the apostle for Jesus to the Gentiles? And how did a quitter like Mark become the first writer of the Gospels? The short answer is their desire to serve Jesus. But there has to be more than that. After all, Mark was actually trying to be there where Jesus was, back when he ended up running naked through the streets. So how does God use weirdos and braggarts and unmerciful haters and sex addicts and quitters to create success? And maybe more importantly for our own lives, how can God take us with our limitations and our fears and our weaknesses and use us to bring His word to the people around us? Well, as I already mentioned, the first step in being transformed is through meeting Jesus and desiring to serve Him. It's only through His gift that we can become blessings to others. But we need to be altered from the screw-ups that we are. So how can we be transformed into messengers of light and blessing? What do we have to do? Well, in short, we can't change ourselves. So we need earnest, persevering prayer. And by earnest, I mean we take this prayer seriously. It's not just a spur-of-the-moment prayer. It's prayer that we desire with all our heart. And persevering means we ask again and again and again. We don't give up when we don't see the results right away. We keep asking. And what do we ask for? Well, we should be praying that God provides us with an endowment of the Holy Spirit to do the work that He has given us wherever He places us. We need to seriously and actually want to do that work and ask the Spirit's guidance and power. And we need to keep on asking over and over. And what will be the result if we keep asking? Well, when we do this, Jesus will give us a burden for the souls of our neighbors and friends. The Spirit will fill our hearts with enthusiasm for telling others of Jesus' saving grace. And will that result only be something that happens inside of us? No. God promises that if we earnestly and persistently pray for the Holy Spirit to work with us and in us, our labors will bear fruit. However, we've got to keep ourselves out of the way and rely only upon the Spirit. We've got to be aware that our own wisdom is foolishness, but God's foolishness is wisdom. We've got to lift up Jesus and leave our own egos behind. So how did Saul become the Apostle Paul? He met Jesus on the road to Damascus and changed. But it did not happen overnight. Did you know that Paul spent, maybe about 3 years in the desert of Arabia studying the scriptures to understand them in a new way after learning that Jesus was the Messiah on the road to Damascus? He would not make it to his ministry at Antioch until about 9 years after his conversion. And what was happening in those waiting years? The Holy Spirit was transforming Paul into a brave, loving, merciful representative of Jesus. And what transformed Peter? Leaving his trust in himself at the foot of the cross, being given his commission by Jesus, and being baptized by the Holy Spirit. And how did Mark stop being a quitter and a screw-up? The Holy Spirit transformed him. He kept hold of Jesus' promises and tried again and again and again. And how can God use us to spread His gospel to others? Well, we need to look to God rather than trusting in ourselves. We need to pray earnestly and persistently for the Holy Spirit. And we need to meet with Jesus in His Word daily and allow Him to transform us. Oh, we'll still be ourselves. We'll be weird and weak and simple. But God uses the simple. He uses the weak and He uses the weird. It's not about who we are. It's about how far we let God into our lives. It's not about what we've not accomplished by ourselves. It's about submitting whatever we do to the leading of the Holy Spirit and letting God accomplish His purposes through us. I hope you enjoyed these little thoughts about weirdos, quitters, and heroes.